Hey everybody, so today I'm with Tony Hirons. Hey Tony.
Good afternoon to you.
Sir, you are the church historian here.
Yeah.
Also, you're involved with the local museum.
Yes.
And you're also involved in...
The town mayor as well.
This is it.
It keeps me off the streets.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the first time I've met somebody with all those three. That's a very interesting mix. So yeah, tell us a little bit about this beautiful church we're in today, Tony.
Okay, the church itself, built around 1170 for a Norman lord of the manor at the time, and obviously has changed hands over the years. The main change to this church was that it had one of the tallest and finest spires in Leicestershire.
Wow.
Until Christmas Day, 1701, and it fell down. And it fell over the North Aisle.
Wow, okay.
And for a long time, they tidied things up, but the place was not in the best of health. And in 1830, a gentleman called Joseph Hansom, of Hansom Cab fame, was in Lutterworth building the town hall, and they then asked him to carry out renovations here, which he did. Only slight problem, they didn't like what he did.
Oh dear.
So it was 1860s before the renowned Victorian architect George Gilbert Scott came in and carried out most of the renovations you would hear today. But there are various artifacts relating to John Wycliffe, and things like the roof bosses above us are 600 years old.
Wow. So yes, the reason we're here today is to find out a little bit more about John Wycliffe.
Yep.
So he has a lot of history here and also at the museum as well, which we'll show some footage of as well through this video. So who was he and why is such an important figure in the Christian story of this nation?
Okay, John Wycliffe was a Yorkshireman, came from North Yorkshire near Richmond. He actually spent a good part of his life at Oxford University, at different colleges there. But he initially spoke out against the power of the Catholic Church, the lands they owned here, the monies they took, etc. But then he began to change after he started studying theology in the 1360s and began to attack various elements of the church service itself. And that led him and his followers to dream up the idea of translating what was the Latin Vulgate Bible into English. And he completed his translations whilst rector here in the 1380s, and his followers, the Lollards, then took out what had been written. And of course, the problem with Wycliffe, unlike people after him, at that time there was no printing press. That was invented 70 years after his death. So what happened is they would translate a page of the Bible either onto parchment or onto vellum, give it to one of their followers who would go off out from here, stand in a market square and say to the people who gathered, I am going to read you a passage of the Bible in English.
That must have really...
Shock, gasp, horror. Exactly. And it grew from there. Obviously, the church, violently against this, they pursued most of his followers through the 15th and early 16th century until the Lollards had been wiped out. But by then, of course, the English Bible had taken over and taken hold. And it was from there that people like Tyndale and others came up with the Bible as we would know it today.
Wow, that's so interesting. And yeah, in terms of for context at the time, why would it have been such a big thing, or why was that such a thing which is been challenged as well? Why would they do that to bring the word of God to people? Why would there be resistance to do that? And also in the context when people are receiving that? What would have they felt at that time to be hearing these words but not in Latin?
You have to remember that at that time, 95% of the inhabitants of England were peasants, and virtually all of them were illiterate. You weren't giving them pieces to read because they couldn't. So the only thing that they would get any teaching at all would be in a church. But that again, because the prevailing language at the time was Latin, would be in Latin. They might hear the Bible, but they'd have no idea what was being said because they couldn't understand it. So to actually start having people coming around and saying, right, I'm going to read you this passage in English, it would have been absolutely astounding to them.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. That must have been, wild just to experience that. And what kind of work did he do in order to make this possible then? He had to go away for a time to do this, and that was a big undertaking?
No, actually, almost the other way round. For most of his time, he was at Oxford.
Right.
And in the 1360s, he became Master of Balliol College, which meant he could study theology. And that's when things began to build from there. He was also, his patron was John of Gaunt, the Earl of Leicester, nephew of the king, and he was involved in various deputations that would go off to the Catholic Church to argue about A, B, or C. However, once he started questioning sections of the Mass, and in particular the subject known as transubstantiation, and this basically is the point in the communion where it is said the body and blood the bread and the wine turn into the body and blood of Christ. And that's really when a lot of his backers disappeared. Because, putting it frankly, what if he was wrong? So that's when he was banished from Oxford and sent to a little church in the middle of nowhere called Lutterworth. This was in 1374, but in fact it had the opposite effect, because he and his followers, without all the pressure from the court and various other commissions, etc., could just settle down here in, frankly, the back of beyond at that time and just get on with the work. And 1383 saw the first completion of the Bible into English.
Wow. And so how, in terms of that particular work, what exactly was he doing, just to name the specific things? I guess it was lots of time transcribing or transliterating, or?
Bit of both, to be absolutely honest. The Bible at that time was the Latin Vulgate Bible. That had been accepted by the church, so there was one book, if you like, to work on with himself and his followers, most of whom could probably speak Latin, so the translation would not be that difficult to do. But what they'd then be doing is to say, well, okay, that's what the words say. How does that actually work in practice? What's the meaning behind it? And needless to say, almost as soon as he'd finished it, there were various people said, oh no, he's got that wrong. No, he didn't get that bit right. And it was that led, nearly 100 years later, to Tyndale saying, okay, let's go back to the original Greek that the Bible was written in, translate from there, and then we get, hopefully, a clean translation.
Wow. And in terms of his story then, like he was, as I understand it, there's lots of persecution against him, and even like things, it was exhumed again. So, and like, as I understand it, and then the church didn't like that, or But what was the story in terms of
Right.
that ending and how he passed away, and then the bit at the end as well?
1373, by which time he was in his 60s, which in the 14th century was a very good age, he had a stroke. Did it impair him? No, it made him work harder. The following year, December the 28th, 1384, while taking a service here in this church, he had a second stroke. He was carried out to his lodgings nearby, and he actually died in his bed on New Year's Eve, 1384. But the church were not going to let him rest. So at the Council of Constance in 1415, he was condemned for nearly 300 heresies against the church and the Bible.
That's a lot of heresies.
Just a few. And it wasn't actually until 1428 where the Bishop of Lincoln, because at that time Lutterworth came under the See of Lincoln, came with various dignitaries, exhumed his body, took it into the churchyard. It was burnt, the ashes and the bones collected up into a bucket. That was taken to the River Swift, which is at the bottom of the town in Lutterworth, and thrown there. But as Thomas Fuller said, so his bones have been consigned into the Swift into the Avon into the Severn, that into the narrow seas, from there into the main seas, and thus the emblem of Wycliffe is born the world over.
Wow, sounds like a real character. What do you, if you were to meet him, what would be a question that you might ask him, or what kind of conversation would you have with him?
He came from a fairly prestigious Saxon family who could trace their lineage back before the Norman conquest. So they had enough sort of power and money for him to go to Oxford in the first place. I think beginning to study theology in the 1360s affected him greatly. And if I was able to sit down with him now, as we are, I would probably say, okay, what made you start working on the Bible? What was this insight that said, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. Yeah. Sounds really intriguing. And then for people who are watching this and want to find out more about this, also we're about to, in a moment, go to the museum as well. So could you just, I'll put some video footage over the top of this. So what kind of things are we about to see? Maybe a little bit of a teaser for people who may want to visit and see some of the historical significance that his life had on on the message and God's word in this nation and beyond.
Well, I mean, first thing I would say is this is, as you will have seen yourself, a very beautiful church. We have things like the Day of Judgment, which is above us. We have various wall paintings. It is said, and I use the word it is said, that the chair that Wycliffe was carried out of the church on is actually by the main altar. There is also the fact that on the wall by the bottom of the nave is the remnants of a cloak which has been dated back to that period, which is called Wycliffe's Cope. There is a memorial on your left-hand side of Wycliffe speaking out with his lollards. So there's a lot to see here. There's an awful lot to see in the museum, and we would certainly welcome anybody that wants to come along and find out more.
Sounds great. Well, if you want to come check out the museum, guys, make sure to. There's lots of history and some really interesting sites we're about to see as well. Got a bit of a teaser so far. But yeah, thanks again for your time today, Tony, and bless you. And thanks again.
My pleasure. Thanks indeed for coming.